You'll see we are in webinar format on the Zoom platform, and this means there are icons at the bottom that may be a little bit different than you normally see.
Bienvenidos, gracias por unirse a este Zoom para una discusión de 3 iniciativas de 30 por 30. Mi nombre es Melanie Schlotterbeck y moderaré esta sesión hoy para Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks, amigos de puertos, playas y parques. Verá que estamos en formato de seminario web en la plataforma Zoom. Esto significa que los iconos en la parte inferior pueden ser un poco diferentes de lo que normalmente ve.
So as you can tell, everything's being translated into Spanish. In fact, every slide has yellow text to match English version of the content. So if you need interpretation services, please click on the globe icon and select Spanish.
Muy bien, como puede ver, el contenido de hoy se está traduciendo al español. De hecho, cada diapositiva tiene texto amarillo para que coincida con la versión en inglés del contenido. Si necesita servicios de interpretación, haga clic en el icono del globo terráqueo y seleccione español.
And I've just moved Mercedes into the Spanish channel. Should you need assistance with closed captioning, that is offered as well at the bottom of the screen. You can click on the closed caption or show captions icon. During today's presentation, we will be accepting questions via the Q&A icon. If you click on that, you'll have the option to ask a question by typing into the box. Select if you want your question to be anonymous and click on the send arrow on the right. Finally, limited interactions will occur during the Zoom in the chat, as it is only being used to pass important information on to our participants. If you need to send something to us, click on the chat icon and type your message and click send. Again, please direct all questions to the panelists through the Q&A feature. Today's event is being recorded and posted to Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks YouTube channel. If you miss any portion, need to see something again, or registered but couldn't make it, this entire workshop will be available online. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let me acknowledge that the state of California exists on occupied territory of over 110 federally recognized and over 70 non-federally recognized tribes. The lands have been stewarded by Native nations since time immemorial. These lands and waters have significance to the indigenous people of California. Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks work focuses on the ancestral homelands of the Ahachiman, Juanino, and Tongva, Gabrielino people. We pay respect to the indigenous people whose land was forcibly colonized and recognize the importance of the tribal relationship to the land, past, present, and future. Today's workshop is brought to you by the Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks nonprofit, FHBP for short. We work to protect the natural lands, waterways, and beaches of Orange County. We're grateful for grant funding from the Orange County Community Foundation that allows these workshops to be made available. The FHBP team working on this webinar includes myself as the panel moderator. I've worked with the organization for a long time now, going on 19 years. We have Mercedes Marlowe, our interpreter, and Yesenia Rivera, who's staffing the chat, Q&A, and did considerable outreach for this workshop. This series is in partnership with the statewide Power in Nature Coalition, which coordinates the grassroots effort for 30 by 30. If you've not heard of 30 by 30, it's an initiative. Let me give you a little primer. Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N8220, which set a goal to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. It's shortened to 30 by 30. It isn't just a California effort. It's a local, state, national, and international effort. The agency responsible for overseeing the implementation of 30 by 30 is the California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA. There are 3 pillars to 30 by 30, which include biodiversity, access to nature, and climate resilience. CNRA released on Earth Day, April 22nd, last year, a document called Pathways to 30 by 30, which identified 10 strategies on how we will achieve 30 by 30. Today, we will cover 3 of them. First is pathway number 5, which focuses on advanced mitigation. Second is pathway number 6, which features environmental stewardship and restoration. Pathway number 10, our third topic for today, covers how to measure the outcomes. We are grateful to have with us today experienced, skilled, and knowledgeable presenters covering these pathways. Let me introduce Liz O'Donoghue from the Nature Conservancy. Liz leads the Sustainable and Resilient Communities Strategy team in the Nature Conservancy of California's climate program. Liz focuses on innovative mitigation approaches, green prints, sustainable land patterns, climate resilience, and transportation planning and policy. Next is the Executive Director of the Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy, John Villa. John has an MBA with an emphasis in technology management, has developed and managed strategies, goals, and budgets at the company, division, and departmental levels. His background and experience cover logistics, contracts management, senior negotiator, and intellectual property in aerospace, consumer electronics, IP management, and university settings. We have 2 for the price of 1 with Green Info Network. Dan Rademacher leads a team of analysts, designers, and developers working for 80 to 100 groups annually, including those engaged in the environment, land and water conservation, public health, social justice, and philanthropy. Personal specialties include strategic communications and messaging, data-driven storytelling, interaction design for websites, visual design for print and presentation, copywriting, innovative intersections of authoritative data and emerging open space or open data sources. And also from Green Info Network is Amanda Kahanek, and she leads a variety of project teams with a focus on data collection and analysis. Personal specialties include organization of complex projects and data, identification of systems for automation, and demographic analyses. Most frequently, her projects involve demographic analyses, equity in access to parks and open spaces, and reducing youth exposure to tobacco products and advertising. We are delighted to have these 4 presenters with us today. Each presentation topic will have about 20 minutes to cover their pathway and answer a few questions. We encourage you to add your questions to the Q&A window so that we can track them there. We anticipate plenty of time at the end for Q&A as well. So don't be disheartened if your question isn't immediately answered. First up is Liz with pathway number 5 on advanced mitigation. Liz, take it away.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, Melanie, who is my idol, and also Yesenia and Mercedes for your great work on this. As you heard, I'm here to present on regional advanced mitigation planning, which is a pathway in the 30 by 30 report. So as you can see, it's pathway number 5, and a short bullet point is that what the pathway is suggesting and urging is to support strategic advanced mitigation planning and investments. And I'll go through why that's important. So what is regional advanced mitigation planning? It's a science-based approach to identify advanced mitigation opportunities to support regional conservation priorities and project delivery. By considering mitigation development Early in the planning process, prior to design and permitting phases, project proponents can identify and invest in higher quality mitigation opportunities. That's a mouthful. Let me break it down for you. So the goals and outcomes are really both and. It's not either or. It's an approach to both achieve meaningful conservation outcomes and expedite project delivery. If done well, it saves time and money. It enables more effective impact avoidance and minimization. It allows for more efficient permitting. It accelerates conservation investments, and it encourages agency and partner communication and transparency. Just wanted to dive a little bit more into the second one, enables more effective impact avoidance and minimization. What that means is by doing the science and understanding where the resources are and having that be an input to infrastructure agency project development, they can more effectively understand before they make the investments and the design, what resources they may be impacting. And so they can make decisions sooner on whether to change the design, adjust the project, and therefore avoid impacting or minimizing impacting important resources, therefore saving time and money, having faster permitting, et cetera. So how is RAMP different from the status quo? A typical mitigation approach is project by project, typically done at the end of a project's timeline. And often that results in isolated postage stamp mitigation that can fail to protect the habitat and species it's required to protect. And that results in habitat and species loss, permit delays, and high costs. By aligning infrastructure and conservation planning, aggregating potential mitigation needs, and doing it all in advance of project delivery, it benefits both the infrastructure side in getting projects done faster, providing certainty and reducing risks, and lowering the costs of their project. And it also benefits the conservation side in investing in conservation priorities, advancing ecosystem and public health, also reducing costs, and as I just mentioned, resulting in fewer impacts, which is really what we're all after. It's not a new idea. RAMP has been considered for decades now. Back in 2006, the Federal Highway Administration published a report called Ecological, an Ecosystem Approach to Developing Infrastructure Projects. And this was a big deal because it was sponsored by a transportation agency, and it looked at how to design projects with nature in mind and with nature as an immediate input to help them achieve their goals in the back end. California put together a statewide work group and published in 2012 a statewide framework for regional advanced mitigation planning. And at the table there were Caltrans, transportation agencies, Department of Water Resources and water agencies, and all the regulatory agencies. So Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, at the state and level, Army Corps, EPA, and the Marine Fisheries Service. And that group spent a lot of time to understand what the relative goals are, how to work through issues, and this draft statewide framework really laid it all out. A lot of this work was tiered off of work that was done in San Diego when they passed their Transnet measure in 2004. They established an environmental mitigation program, which provided funding upfront to do the mitigation sooner rather than later. And they found that they achieved their goals, their 10-year goals in 6 years, and at about 60% of the cost of what they had estimated. And that's because they had the money available to invest when the markets were down. And it allowed for a more thoughtful, strategic approach where they achieved all their goals, both on the project side and on the environmental side. OCTA followed in Sandag's footsteps and put together a freeway environmental mitigation program. And Melanie was one of the architects of that back in 2006 as part of their M2 program. And they have seen similar benefits and success. And in 2016, Caltrans established an advanced mitigation program by legislative action. The legislature established this through SB1 and provided $120 million over 4 years to capitalize an advanced mitigation program. And we'll look at some of the work that they've done since then. The foundations and tools are vast. Advanced mitigation is rooted in the requirement to adhere to the federal and state environmental laws. And the advanced mitigation frameworks that have come out of those laws include habitat conservation plans at the state level and the federal level, the regional conservation investment strategy and mitigation credit agreements, which are instruments to advance mitigation. Mitigation and conservation banks are founded on investing now for credits later, and similarly with in lieu fee programs. One thing I'll say is that these laws are longstanding, very well detailed in what the requirements are. And more over the last 10 years, there's been a recognition and an importance placed on the importance of landscape scale conservation and landscape scale mitigation. And so some of the challenges have been how to explicitly identify ways that entities can do RAMP, but that are nested in these laws, because those are the policies and the authorities that the regulatory agencies have. But the science is showing that species and habitats succeed better when they are planned at the landscape scale. On the left side is a map of the natural communities conservation plans and habitat conservation plans that exist in the state of California. And on the right is a map of the regional conservation investment strategies that are either approved or in development. NCCPs and HCPs have been around for decades and they're incredibly successful. They're very hard to do, but when it's delivered, it is turnkey mitigation. It's the highest, most efficient use of and process and permitting. And NCCPs are sponsored by local governments, so there's a lot of buy-in. RCISs, or regional conservation and investment strategies, became effective in 2017, and so we're really seeing the initial stages of that. And so you can see almost 11 million acres are covered by existing or planned RCISs, and there are some guidelines out now that are coming in the spring to show how mitigation credit agreements can be implemented. So it's a little bit in the early stages. As I mentioned, RAMP has a lot of background and grounding in science. And so it's a science-based landscape scale integrated planning process. These things are hard. Most planners really focus on their own world. This requires that both infrastructure agencies and conservation planners plan together. So it includes on the left side, planned infrastructure projects, and on the right side, conservation information. Sometimes those overlap, sometimes they don't. But here's a stepwise process to establishing a RAMP program. You start with identifying planned infrastructure projects. Because this is a mitigation program, you really have to know what is the goal, what projects are you trying to target. So thanks to Caltrans District 7, we are looking at their maps from their regional advanced mitigation needs assessment, which they're doing throughout the entire state. And this is District 7 in the Los Angeles region. If you look closely, you can see little yellow lines and dots, and those are what the transportation projects are. So they identified those. And then they identified a lot of conservation information, some that are critical to include, like critical habitat, water resources, habitat connectivity, and then also information that looking forward, they know they will need in the future, like climate risk areas. So they have flood hazard areas, they have climate resilience, and the habitat connectivity also allows for climate refugia. So Caltrans has, this is just a snapshot of some of the data they've put together. But what they've done is they've looked at the suite of information that is important for mitigation and important to make their transportation system resilient and to contribute to conservation priorities. Once you have the conservation information and the transportation projects or any infrastructure project, you can run models to overlay the footprints of the transportation projects, I'll just focus on that for now, on the existing habitat models. And that allows you to predict potential impacts and determine the mitigation needs for selected projects. And it's important to know this is not for one project, it is for many projects. So then you can aggregate and predict with some level of sort of order of magnitude of what you need. And then what you do is you collaborate and you identify suitable mitigation sites or existing options that support conservation priorities. So on the one hand, you can look at what you need, you look at your landscape, you see what the conservation priorities are, and you create mitigation credits by protecting, restoring, or enhancing habitat through instruments like conservation or mitigation banks or mitigation credit agreements. Or if there is an existing plan like an NCCP or an RCIS or an existing bank, you can participate in those plans or purchase mitigation banks from existing banks or mitigation credit agreements. So both are good, both are planned in advance, and it just is, it's dependent on whether there are existing plans in the area. Here's an example of what we're trying to get at. So this is a hypothetical example, and we're looking at red-legged frog habitat. What you see is in brown, protected areas. What you see in yellow is a watershed at the Huck 12 scale, so it's a little smaller. What you see in the black lines are hypothetical transportation projects or other projects, and those are modeled. And then what you see in the green are little hexagons, and that shows red-legged frog habitat. And where it is darker green, it means that there are more of those priorities included in that area, like habitat connectivity, carbon sequestration, multi-species richness. So you're trying to plan and acquire areas that are the darkest green as possible in the habitat and attached or adjacent to existing conservation to essentially build out a connected landscape of conserved areas. And once that connectivity exists, there's a much better opportunity and much better likelihood that the species will persist and the mitigation will be successful. So you need funding for this. There are many different ways to fund. A typical way is by aggregating funding that is part of an infrastructure project. Infrastructure always includes mitigation. So you aggregate that together and make that available early. In the state of California, the Caltrans program is funded by SB1. There's also regional funding, as we mentioned, SANDAG and OCTA. There are county sales taxes and state infrastructure funding. Private funding is possible, but it is a little harder. It seems to be that public funding sources are really the most, sort of the best opportunity. Here's a way that the process could work for funding. So you start with funding, you invest in a conservation project or a restoration project that is guided by the priorities identified by the mapping. And you create those credits and either do that through a mitigation bank or one of the other tools that we talked about, but you're holding those credits. Then an infrastructure project is done. And then the funding that was aligned with that infrastructure can go back into the original funding pot. The timing of advanced mitigation with infrastructure or transportation project delivery is important. You can see on the right that that for transportation, this is a Caltrans slide. You can see that the advanced mitigation project is conducted before construction, and that's really important. So the sequencing is important and the funding is important to allow that to happen. There's essentially two funding models. One is a revolving fund where there is seed money that capitalizes a ramp program. Advanced mitigation actions occur. Then project funding for the mitigation is available that then goes and replenishes the ramp fund, and it continues. And as it goes, you can see this continual funding of projects going forward. The other option is a drawdown. You essentially have a bucket, the funding is filled, and then as the projects are mitigated and the funding is expended, it is drawn down. And that is the approach for both the San Diego and the Orange County Transportation Agency. What's really important, and this was highlighted in the Pathways to 30 by 30 report, is that advanced mitigation actions and investments are done for mitigation, but it is better to leverage co-benefits and other opportunities as those investments are being done. So investments can be made to protect habitat and species, but can also protect groundwater recharge. It can allow for setback levees. It can help with wildfire and flooding resilience. And it also helps with recreation and human health benefits. So from the Pathways report, it says, prioritize advanced mitigation projects that achieve multiple benefits. Improving environmental and biodiversity outcomes often required in mitigation while achieving climate benefits and access goals. So it really can be leveraged to generate a whole lot of other goals that we care about. One benefit to RAMP is that mitigation actions are done in a more transparent and a more collaborative way. So partners and collaborators include those who need mitigation, like cities, counties, infrastructure agencies, solar developers, and housing developers. The suite of regulatory agencies are critical. They approve mitigation. They also have the best idea of the habitat that needs to be protected. And because they are so critical, it's really important to have them at the ground stage to work with them so that they can understand and infrastructure agencies can understand each other. Another partner and collaborator are those who supply mitigation, and those include habitat agencies, mitigation bankers, mitigation credit agreement sponsors, and conservancies, land trusts, and open space districts. We've seen a lot of benefit in the San Diego and the Orange County programs to sit down with everybody at the table, and opportunities are brought that are well supported by the local communities. And local governments and stakeholders are really important. They both provide guidance and policy guidance, and they also provide opportunities. Just a couple more snapshots on the projects. One is the Western Riverside County HCP, that is the largest NCCP in the country. There's also robust programs in Santa Clara County, Placer County, and San Diego. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. So I will remind everyone in the audience, if you have a question, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. But let me start with a question for you on the science. How does science help guide the three pathways, and what are the limitations of science for implementation?
Well, for advanced mitigation, science is really the underpinning of both the impact analyses and also identifying the conservation opportunities. And without the science, it couldn't be done, because what science is doing there is it's really building a common understanding of what the needs are. What do the infrastructure agencies or the developers need? And what does the environment need to be healthy? And then also what has happened in the collaboration of it is you get people sitting around the table to share information, to agree on what's the most important data, to understand what those co-benefits are, to broaden the basis of support, and then to really make decisions. Now, the limitations are that data is only as good as the source. And data is used for planning and used for understanding what may be needed and understanding what the conservation priorities are. But for mitigation, there has to be certainty. And so while planning can get us so far and can get us very far, there always has to be site visits and on the ground verification that the habitat and the species can persist in the areas that they're identifying.
One more question. You talked about partnerships. What's the role of a partner like a nonprofit or a tribe or a community group in a ramp?
So people who are at the, live there, are part of the community, know the landscape really well. There's really two roles. One is to provide feedback on whether opportunities for investment in protection or restoration are really the best places. They can also provide support and broaden the community understanding of the value and the benefits of this. They can also raise a red flag where they can say, nope, this is not a good place. There needs to be more. And so it's really, really critical to be in sync with community groups. I'll add one more, and this was really the most important, and we've seen both in the OCTA program and the SANDAG program, is people come to both regulatory agencies and the infrastructure agencies with opportunities. Here's a piece of property that we've been wanting to conserve for years. We need more funding. Can you help? And we've seen celebrated parcels that have been acquired through mitigation and put into long-term, durable, permanent protection that everybody is so happy about. And so it's really an opportunity to leverage the expertise of the local communities and land trusts in the places that they live.
One question from Barbara. Are there pitfalls in this approach? And do you have any cautions about using advanced mitigation?
There's been a lot of pitfalls that have been identified. And because it's been around for years, there's been a lot of ways to try to reduce those pitfalls. So one of the pitfalls is to not put too much, don't plan too precisely. So it's not for one project. It's not like we're going to mitigate now for one project in the future, because then you're basically deciding now for what the impacts and the mitigation will be in the future. But you can't do that. You have to do it for many different projects and you aggregate. So you say to yourself, okay, I think I'm going to need about this range of habitat for these multiple projects in the future. And then you acquire that habitat and those credits that could be used for projects in the future, but it's not precise. So if one project doesn't happen, that's okay. You have those credits for other projects. If another project needs more, that's okay, you have it. And so it's more of a rolling view of moving forward. I think that's probably the biggest concern. I think also the other concern is that these plans take a long time and they take a lot of work. And so there really has to be, kind of dedicated support to really stay it through and to work through the issues that are very complex.
Institutional knowledge is quite important as well with staff turnover. So that's another role that nonprofits can play. Thank you, Liz. So I know there are a couple other questions in the Q&A. We will get to those at the end if we can. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the next slide and introduce John for pathway number 6, which is environmental restoration and stewardship. Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy has been working along the Orange County coast for a number of years now. John, we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good morning. My name is, again, John Villa. I'm the executive director here. We're one of the few, if not the only, estuary in California that's owned by a 501c3 nonprofit. I know Melanie's going to may challenge that a little bit because of the work she's been doing with Banning Ranch, but I want to just to bring to the point, we've actually bought the property and have restored it. So that's where we differentiate between the two groups. So what I'm going to talk about today is Pathway 6. We're going to look at expanding and accelerating environmental stewardship and the main function of restoring degraded landscapes and waterways. And these are the 3 topics we're going to be looking at today in reference to the topic 6 for the 30 by 30 plan. How we converted 127 acres successfully so far of relic salt marsh back to a working fully titled wetlands, working with various agencies, how and when to bring them into the conversation and planning. And then the Cut the Green Tape initiative, which is a new initiative being managed through California Department of Fish and Wildlife, that there are still a lot of agencies trying to understand what their part is in the process. So that's going to be very important as we look at this topic. So our mission has always been to acquire, restore, maintain, and educate the public on the acreage that we have acquired. We've been in existence for 37 years. We've restored the 127 acres so far back to a wetlands. We just acquired 48 additional, got a typo on this one too. 48 additional acres that we're going to be restoring in the next 3 to 5 years. So our mission is now going to be changing to restore, maintain, and educate, because we've acquired the last pieces of property that we can restore back to wetlands. This used to be 2,900 acres of coastal wetlands. Banning Ranch and our property shared that estuary footprint down here. But because of a number of things that happened in Southeast Huntington Beach, it stopped the saltwater flow from coming in back in the 1920s, and also closing up the Santa Ana riverbed that stopped the freshwater from coming in. It dried up all of this property that's down here. So we had to do a number of things in order to restore our wetlands. Oops. So I don't know if that jumped ahead one too many. Yeah. So we started off as a group of concerned citizens. We saw this property down here. We became a 501c3 in 1985, and our current holdings right now are 191 acres. So it's cost us $8.5 million to date to buy the property, another $10.2 million to date to restore what we have restored, and it's going to take us another $9 million to restore the Newland Marsh once we get permit approvals for that. So how did we convert 127 acres? Well, we started off looking at this area in Southeast Huntington Beach. This is the area that used to be a marshland over 100 years ago of the 2,600 acres that was down here. We've bought 191. We've converted 127 acres so far. And when we get completion of the 48 acres that we're going to be converting in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have 170 acres of restored marsh. Not all of them will be fully tidal. Some will be muted tide. We'll talk about that a little bit too. So if you look at this area, this is what used to be here in Southeast Huntington Beach. That's the 2,900 acres that used to be in this area. And now it's going to be, by the time we get through, less than 6% will be restored. Oops, sorry about that. So here we are. This is Southeast Huntington Beach. We're looking at the Santa Ana riverbed over here to the east. We're looking at Beach Boulevard to the west. Yes, I say it that way because our shores here in Huntington Beach actually change, and it's almost due west as you're looking at our property, due south as you're looking outside of our property to the ocean. It's not west like it is in other parts of the state. So we have the Talbot Marsh we own. the Brookhurst Marsh, the Magnolia Marsh, an area we call Upper Magnolia Marsh, and this is the newly acquired Newland Marsh. So 1988, this is when it all started. We acquired this property primarily from 6 different agencies. We had to divert what used to be the Orange County Public Works flood control channel, used to go dump directly into the Santa Ana River. We diverted that to go under PCH, under a parking lot in State Beach, and that's where our inlet is now. So this is a fully tidal marsh. And we restored that in 1988, and it was 25 acres of that property. Next, we have the Brookhurst Marsh, which to date is the largest marsh that we have actually restored so far. It's 62 acres. Again, we had to do the same thing. We had to dredge out this area because it was no longer a marsh, put in all the channels, build up all the islands, and then breach the levee wall that was here that was part of the existing flood channel. And we did this back in 2006, 2008. Next was Magnolia Marsh and Upper Magnolia Marsh. This is Upper Magnolia Marsh here. Again, we did this in 2008, 2010. It's a total of 40 acres. Like Brookhurst Marsh, we dredged out all the channels. We breached the levee to gain tidal influence. And it's kind of a reverse flow, only because our water comes from the south here, way over in Talbot Marsh, has to go west, and then it fills to the south in our marshes. So we had to develop them a way to make sure that we would have a complete wash of the 2 high tides and low tides that occur in the Pacific Ocean. So this is what we're looking at right now. This is actually the Newland Marsh, not the Brookhurst Marsh. Sorry about that. This was just acquired 2 years ago. It took us many years to work on this. We've been working on it since 2005 to acquire this acreage. This is acquired from Caltrans. We were able to complete that acquisition 2 years ago. We've been working on the engineering plan to the 30% design. We've completed that. We've started the process for obtaining funding for the permitting process, which we're hoping to get by June 1st of this year. And then it'll be another 18 months once we go through permitting before we finally get conclusion of the permitting process, get to our 60 to 70% design, and then ultimately start restoration in 2025 to 2026. It'll actually be done over a 2-year period because we have to be concerned about nesting season. So what we're going to do is work on Newland West first, wait till the nesting season is completed, and then we'll start on Newland East after that. So we can make sure that we have habitat for the nesting birds that we see in our marshes. So working with agencies, how and when to bring them in. How? Bring them in as soon as you can. Some of the things that we're also going to talk about is what are some of the issues that we have to deal with, which is different if you're a city, county, or state-owned estuary, because we're responsible for maintaining these as a private entity. So on October 11, 2022, 25,000 gallons of oil spilled in our marshes. And we were lucky. We had just worked out 2 years previously with OSPR, Oil Spill Prevention and Recovery, which is a division of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, to do a what if an oil spill will occur and we couldn't close off the inlet. How would we stop the flow of oil, contaminated seawater into our marsh? And as you can see, there's a boom system on here. That's what we practice. Well, little did we know, 2 years later, an oil spill occurred. And working with OSPR, CDFW, and the county, we had this burned off, the booms in place within 24 hours, and the inlet burned off within 24 hours of notification. So the good thing was we only had 2 high tides of contaminated seawater that came into our marsh. Instead of a continuing movement of seawater in all 3 marshes, which we did have, we lessen the amount of contaminated seawater by being able to do this at a short period of time. So again, getting your agencies involved up front will help planning things for the future. And this really worked out for us because of this oil spill that occurred. So here's kind of, it was actually on October 2nd. Here's kind of the chain of events. We are notified by the city at 2 p.m. We contacted Orange County Public Works by 2:30. 4 o'clock, we were notified by California Department of Fish and Wildlife that OSPR was coming out to deploy the booms. By the next day at 12 noon, OSPR notified me, 12 in the morning, that booms were in place. So that's 10 hours after they were notified. And by 8 a.m., I was notified by Orange County Public Works that the inlet had been burned off, less than 24 hours. So by getting all of these agencies involved, we were able to really minimize the impact in our marshes, even though we were impacted. Another event that we had last year was our inlet was cut off for 4.5 months, almost 5 months. This was a result of our inlet gets a lot of sand that goes over the front of the inlet. As I mentioned before, our beaches face west. So when we get severe currents in the ocean and we get a lot of storm going on, it actually will pull sand across our inlet and block it off. Well, the problem we have is right next door to our inlet is a federal preserve for the California least terns. So we're mandated by the state of California, by the state coastal commissions and CDFW, that they cannot put any equipment in there while least tern baby season occurs. I was notified on April 12th. And unfortunately, it took a while for all of the agencies to review this, review the documentation to get the emergency permit for Orange County Public Works. And as a result of that, we couldn't get any equipment in there because California least terns were already showing up. So we worked with a number of agencies to get tidal flow back in there because we were starting to see die off of fish, our eelgrass, a lot of our bivalves, a lot of things going wrong in our marshes. So one of the first things we did is we installed aerators and pumps. So this is in contact with Orange County Public Works, Flood Control District, the city of Huntington Beach, to be able to put a pump in place that basically took salt water out of our marshes, jetted it back in to aerate the water. And we did that for about 3 months until such time as those machines had to go in for their annual maintenance. And then we worked with my neighbor that's right behind me, AES Southland, the county, state water board, and a number of other people. And we actually tapped into a saltwater tank that's on the AES property because they use once through cooling on one generator still here. And we were able to put pumping in a little over 2 million gallons of fresh seawater a day. And we did that for about 1.5 months. And the permitting authorities worked with us to figure out what type of permit we can use. It was an emergency permit. We just had to do a little bit of engineering to get it reviewed by all the parties. And my neighbors to the north donated their money and their effort into making this happen. And then we had to pay out a certain amount of funds to also make this happen on our property. So this is the pipeline right here. You can see it on this picture of fresh salt water coming in. It's an 8-inch pipe at a little over 2 million gallons a day. We also get oil seepage that comes in because there was a lot of oil drilled here in Southeast Huntington Beach. That still occurs. Sometimes it's just the movement of the soil. Sometimes it's things offshore. Those pop up on occasion, and that's just another issue that we have to deal with in our marshes because where we're located in Southeast Huntington Beach. So from the April 12th to September 14th, these are the names, look at the agencies that we had to deal with in order just to get permits in place to open up the channel, to see what we can do about getting the pumps in place with the AES power plant and all the process just to get in fresh seawater. So CDFW, State Coastal Commission, State Parks, Orange County Public Works, the state and county water boards, Army Corps of Engineering, NOAA, and many others. So we were on constant phone calls with and emails with all these organizations just to try to make sure we could get the inlet open as soon as possible. The good thing for us is every one of these agencies have been out to our property at some point in time. So that's a very significant thing whenever you're going through any of these processes, is getting all the agencies involved up front, aware of who you are, make sure they know your properties and what you're trying to do. And if it's something you're trying to do for the future, looking at what Liz was talking about in her presentation, is getting those individuals, organizations out there so you can start hearing their questions before you submit your data. Because a lot of times you can put that information into your permitting package. So you've already answered some of those questions up front rather than going the back and forth routine that normally happens anyway when you're dealing with agencies. But we had to test all of the water. We were doing daily testing on that to make sure we knew what our levels were. Our dissolved oxygen levels were going from 7 down to 0. And it also depends on whether it was at the surface or at the mudflat. So these are things we had to continually work on a daily basis for almost 5 months. So the, excuse me, last thing I'm going to talk about is the Cut the Green Tape initiative and where we are with that. Again, this is somewhat of a new process going through CDFW. They're the primary organization that's being responsible for looking at managing the process. In essence, I don't want to say it's you're bypassing CEQA. What it looks like more for the people that are involved with this is sort of a CEQA light. How do we go through this process, still doing the work that we need to do that's part of CEQA, but doing it at a lower level, and hopefully, especially for those individuals like us that have to go out and get all of our funding, at a reduction in cost. And we think this will save us a significant amount of money just to go through this process. So this is how we're going to convert Newland East and West. Like I said, we're going to start on Newland West first, then we'll work on Newland East. Our plan is 0 amount of sand will be, or dirt will be removed from the property. Whatever we dig out of our channels will then be built up onto the islands. And so everything will be sequestered here on site. So again, these are all, a lot of the agencies we dealt with in order just to do the acquisition, $2.5 million, and working with Caltrans in order to be able to make that happen. So here's how we notified agencies. We've been doing this since 2005, contacting everybody. And we started our long range plan in 2005, notified Caltrans in 2008. We wanted to buy it. They finally came back to us in 2017. And this is all the processes we had to go through just to acquire the property. The new initiative is under Executive Order N8220, established in October 2020 by Governor Newsom. And this is the Cut the Green Tape initiative. So anybody that wants to know more information about this and how the process works, you do need a lead agency in order to be able to process. They can contact me. I'll be more than happy to sort of walk them through what we've been going through so far. And other projects we're working on, we're now the 8th site in California that has salt marsh birdsbeak in our marsh. It's an endangered species of plant. We are doing a 570 linear feet of restoration of a living shoreline in Talbot Marsh. And I think I'm about up, so I think I'll end it here and see if there's any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, John. A reminder to the audience to go ahead and type questions into the Q&A box, but I'll start with one question on what's the biggest challenge you have to restoring wetlands?
The biggest challenge, believe it or not, for us, it has not been the local citizenry around where we're at. They actually want us to do the work that we've been doing. So that hasn't been an issue. The biggest issue we've been having is probably keeping up with all the rules and regulations. And as they change, especially as we're looking at things like rising sea level, we're right across the beach. So we have to be very careful when we look at designing what we're going to do to make sure that we take in rising sea level into consideration, and how our property lays up against very major thoroughfares like Pacific Coast Highway, Beach Boulevard. We have to make sure that whatever we design into our restorations, even at a king tide level with a rain event and rising sea level, that we don't start flooding those major thoroughfares. So that has to go into our design. So we're very careful about that, but that's probably the biggest obstacle we're dealing with right now, is making sure we take into consideration the rising sea level issues.
A follow-up question on sea level rise: how do coastal wetlands help reduce impacts from sea level rise?
It's a placeholder, or a place area, I should say, for water to go. So as water is coming in, it just naturally fills up the wetlands. Where we have an issue here in Southeast Huntington Beach is some of our streets, city streets just located to the north of us, are at sea level or even below sea level. Mm-hmm. So our issue that we have there is we don't have a way to capture that water and allow it to settle into an area, which is what our estuary does. It will flood the city. So since we have 2 flood channels that empty into our marsh, sort of the events happen, it rains on the streets, the water goes to the flood channels fill up, it goes to the wetlands, those fill up, and then at the next low tide, the water goes out to sea.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this presentation, John. Mm-hmm. We'll go ahead and move over to Green Info Network. My understanding is that Amanda will be our primary speaker on this one. So Amanda, take it away.
Great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you to Friends of Harbors Beaches and Parks, Millie for getting this all together, and to Liz and John for their earlier presentations. As noted, I'll be going over how we measure the outcomes that look at the work you all are doing, both Liz, John, and many of you on the call. So today we're going to cover what is considered conserved in 30 by 30 and a little bit of the background, looking at a high level of how that gets measured. So what counts as conserved in 30 by 30? There are 2 main topics we'll go over today. And the first one is the lands must have permanent protection. So in order to be counted in 30 by 30, we need durability of that protection. So that means we need either a fee or an easement over the property that's showing that permanent protection. And also it needs to be in the statewide databases of CPAD or CCED that inventory those lands that are covered by fee title or easements held. And so we'll go through all of that in more detail. And then a second element is that the protected property also needs to aim to protect biodiversity. And so that's being measured through gap codes. And essentially that comes down to gap code 1 or gap code 2 qualify as properties that are protected and counted towards the 30% in 30 by 30's goals. So those are the 2 topics we'll walk through in more detail today. So one thing I wanted to start with is we talked about quickly CPAD and CCED. So these are 2 statewide databases that are managed by Green Info Network. We have a lot of information online at calands.org about them, but essentially the California Protected Areas Database is where we track fee title protection of properties. We have over 1,000 agencies in California that do that. So CPAD and CCED are meant to be collaborative databases that gather information from all these agencies, so you know your own properties and lands, but those also that are working around you, so we can see the full wall-to-wall network of protected areas across the state of California. The easements are tracked in a separate database, and that database is referred to as CCED. And the reason is that properties held in fee title and easement are treated differently. There are different things that we need to know about those properties and different levels of sensitivity about that information. So they are tracked in 2 different databases. An important thing I want to note is that there are lands in both CPAD and CCED that are considered protected for the purposes of those 2 databases, but that does not mean they necessarily qualify as the 30% within 30 by 30. So an example of that would be that CPAD also tries to inventory all of say recreation. So there will be things such as a baseball diamond or a city park that may not necessarily count towards biodiversity, but they are extremely important in other parts of what the state needs to be doing for its population as a whole. So it's important to note that you need to be in CPAD and CCED in order to be a part of 30 by 30's inventory, but it doesn't, if you're in those 2, it doesn't mean you're automatically counted towards that 30%. So when we talk about biodiversity, that's where we'll touch on that. So a little bit more about CPAD and CCED. It is thought to be one of the best databases across the US. We contribute our information to PAD-US, the Protected Areas Database of the United States. So the California element comes from CPAD and CCED, being passed to the national effort at USGS to include them. But that being said, there are, like I said, thousands of agencies and organizations, nonprofits working actively all the time to protect more land across the state. So this is a living database. So there might be some things that we're missing from the past and also those that you're bringing online right now. So we're always happy to hear. We know that improvements are needed. So if you see something that needs improvements within either database, we are very happy to hear about that. I'll give you some quick overviews of how that can be done. And we're also always available. You can drop me a note, email, or call, and happy to go over that. So at the end of the day, the message here is that within this pathway of measuring the outcomes, we really need the help of the groups that are on this call and others across the state that are protecting the lands to make sure that they're properly represented in these two databases. So we need your help. Things to look for when improving the data. We have more in-depth webinars that we'll offer. We're also available for one-on-one support, but I do want to say that there are a number of ways we're allowing folks to give us information. We know that people have different technical capacities and abilities, different information on file. And so each of these thousands of agencies are unique. So we're trying to support a wide scope of information being sent to us. So if you have GIS data and you're comfortable with it, we're happy to accept that. If instead you already have, say, existing maps, like some of the ones that John and Liz showed earlier, we can help you work with those to define your properties. If you have APN or parcel numbers through a deed or an easement agreement, all of those are acceptable methods that we would be happy to work with you to use to refine or include your properties and the two databases. We also have an online map application that I've linked to here that if you wanted to visit, if you wanted to view the information online on a map, but you don't want to work in GIS, this is a method where you can pull up a map similar to Google Maps and browse around, identify your properties, search to make sure that they're in there. And as I said, we know that each of you are unique organizations with unique capacities. So you're always happy to contact us at the CPAD email, and we'll get back to you and work with you one-on-one to make sure we support that inclusion. So that's sort of the first half of, remember, we were saying, if you want to be counted in 30 by 30, if you have properties that you think should count towards the 30%, the first step is making sure that you get them included and they need to be in CPAD and CCED. The second element is that 30 by 30 has a focus on biodiversity. And so in order to do that, the measure that's used is gap code. And those that are gap code 1 or 2, it's a scale of 1 to 4, are the ones that have been considered to count towards that 30%. There are two main elements that can help you determine if you think your lands qualify as gap code 1 or 2. They're very nuanced, and we'll go into more of the detail, but at the high level, you need to have an active management plan for the property that you have protected. Secondarily, that management plan needs to prioritize the protection of natural land cover on the property. So it could be that you're restoring to it, that's okay, but you need to actually have that as an aim and a goal of the management plan that you have. So if you have looked at the 30 by 30 data that's currently out from CNRA, I wanted to note that you've probably seen issues. You might have lands in there, you might have lands that are missing, you might have lands that are in there that you feel are correctly represented or ones that are not. So this comes back to a second place where we're asking for your help, which is that we need your lands properly represented, but then we also need your help to understand if they qualify as gap 1 or gap 2. So if you're working to protect biodiversity in the long term, and that's what will then allow them to be included in 30 by 30. So I did want to touch on the fact that if you've looked at 30 by 30 data that came out from CNRA that they have available online, if you started to look through it, we did do an initial gap assignment, but that gap assignment has focused on federally protected lands. So things that are coming through Forest Service, BLM, all of these large agencies that work federally. And the reason for that is that PAD US has been able to assign gap codes to those larger properties through some sort of inferring from the name, who owns the property. So these allow them to identify essentially and mark those that are gap 1 and gap 2 on a federal level. So that's how those have been entered. The problem is that does not work at a state or a local level, and that's a known issue. But what we wanted to do was work out the system for inventorying the gap codes, having them in both CPAD and CCED, and reflecting that through the system. So now where we're at is saying that we would like you to look at your properties and give us the gap code that you think is appropriate. We will then assign the gap code that you have indicated is correct into the database, and that would overwrite any information that is currently in the database. And an important element is gap systems are coded 1, 2, 3, 4. Many lands are in a 3 or a 4 status, but that's actually more reflective of no data than saying your lands are a gap 3 or a gap 4. So if you look at it initially and you feel the gap code reflected is incorrect, we acknowledge that. I apologize for that, but as a part of the data processing and to get to the point of getting the federal lands in, that's how we've started. So if you see a 4 or you see a 3 and that's not appropriate, know that that's definitely more representative of no data versus us saying that's the accurate gap code for your property. So local agencies are the ones that know their lands best. We are relying on you to provide the authoritative data. So if you find information that's incorrect and you submit it to us, just reiterate, we will be using the information that you provide instead of this pre-assigned value that's currently in it. And so there have been a couple of common questions that have started to come up when we've give presentations or talk with folks about gap codes. And so I wanted to preemptively help answer some of those. So one is, do I get to assign gap codes to my own lands and properties? And the answer is yes. We will help you do that in a number of ways. We'll offer support in terms of understanding gap codes, documentations, contacts, etc. But at the end of the day, yes, both the responsibility and the ability to reflect those gap codes does land with the agency that owns and or manages the property. That's the authoritative portion. Gap codes are particularly difficult to assign. The scale of 1, 2, 3, 4 seems quite simplistic, but it's actually a very difficult thing once you get into the nuance of the definitions. So I will show some of the tools that we currently have to support making those decisions. But I also wanted to recognize that we know this is the harder element, and we'll go over a bit of the timeline, but knowing that this is not something that needs to come out immediately. And we do plan to offer working groups and collective working groups for folks with similar type lands so that they can come up with sort of a consistent way of applying the gap codes to their properties. Related to that is many of your properties probably have a mix of gap codes. And so you will be able to say within a property, you have a mix of the gap codes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you'll be able to tell us what portion. So if you want to say half of a property or a third is gap code 2 and the rest is 4, that's perfectly appropriate. If one gap code applies, or it's quite close, in the 98% range, it's fine to also just apply one gap code. You have that flexibility to be as detailed or nuanced as you want within that. We are not requiring that you give us spatial data about where that gap code exists within the property. So if you have 100 acres and 50 of it are gap code 2, you do not have to specify which half of that property is qualified as the gap code. And part of the reasoning there is that the spatial data becomes very difficult not only to maintain, but it's also probably not something that agencies have the capacity, time, or interest in developing that data. So we've come up with a system where if we give you the acreage of your property, you're able to tell us what percentage fall within each of the 4 gap codes. So hopefully that makes it simpler for folks. And I am happy to answer more and other gap code questions that come up later as we go through. So we have developed a number of resources to hopefully help groups get started understanding what's in the databases currently and how to give us feedback. So I'll just show you a few quick images of those, knowing that we also have other webinars and support systems for those who want to reach out. But we've developed a toolkit that's available online at the same calands.org. It's the 30 by 30 toolkit section. And so you can go in and download the information for your agency. We've taken a subset of CPAD and CCED to just those lands owned or managed by one agency. That's done because there are thousands of records. If you want the full database, you can get it. But when reviewing the lands, we thought you might want to just review your individual properties. When you download that toolkit, you'll find pieces of information that you can pick to work through. So we'll have instructions that are, well, those are already up online, but we also have GIS shapefiles for those who want to look at it. So the map here on the left is showing the Dangerman Preserve, where you can see the larger park itself in the dark green outline, but also the individual parcels within that property. So if you felt that was incorrect and you're comfortable in GIS, you can make those edits and send us back your GIS data. Or you could instead say, I actually just have a map and I want you to infer the difference, or I have parcel numbers, and send us that information. If you're not interested in working in GIS for whatever reason, that's fine. Also, we'll have Excel tables available for you to go through a list of your properties that will include these attributes, such as the name. We're asking for these key pieces of information for you to enter or review if they're already in there. So making sure that we have the proper size, the correct agency that manages the property, if the public is allowed to visit, yes, no, or with restrictions such as a permit. And then making sure we have an appropriate name for the park or the property. It makes it easier for the public to understand when looking at a map. And then you'll see there'll be information about gap codes at the end. We do, like I said, have the online map collaborator. So if you want to look at maps, but you don't want to be using GIS, this is a quick image of what that same preserve looks like in the map collaborator website environment on the right here. And then here is an example of other elements within the toolkit. On the top, we're showing the table. So in this case, I've pulled the Nature Conservancy's data out of their toolkit, and you can see they have about 45 properties, and we've listed those key information attributes that I talked about. So the name of the park or property, if the public is allowed to visit that property or not, and then the acreage. So in this case, if you're familiar with the acreage of your property, you might be able to review this and see if that's close to what you expect. And then here in column G, you'll see the link to the map collaborator. So if you were to click on this link, it would pull up that map shown on the previous slide. So it will go to the application and zoom you to the actual property that you're interested in, so you can narrow right in on that. We are also sensitive to the fact that folks might not want to be working in that environment either. So we also offer what I show examples of here on the bottom, which are PDF maps. So if you would like to request, we'd be happy to send you PDF maps of each of your properties. So if you were to do that, we would bundle up a PDF and send you that or post it online, just because we don't want to make the toolkit too large, so they're not inherently included, but they are all readily already run and available. So on the right, you can see a property that CAL FIRE has, and we've shown the parcels within that property that are considered protected in as a fee title property. And then on the right would be an example of a conservation easement that's held by CAL FIRE, one of their demonstration forests. So you can see the teal outline showing the full boundary of the easement, and then the individual parcels within for reference. So hopefully these different options will give you ways to both review the data and then send us back information as need be to correct or include. One important thing is that the toolkits have been set up so that we can run weekly updates. So if you send us information, we get to that update as soon as possible. It depends on how many updates you have and what format your information comes in, but it's not unusual for us to be able to do that within the 2-week time period. What we can do is send you back a note saying we've made your edits. If you would like to go review it, you can re-download your toolkit and you would see the refreshed version of the changes we've made as you requested. This is not a published live version yet. It's simply a way for you to review and make sure that we've interpreted your information correctly. So we can work back and forth in an iterative style for those who need be. And then the last thing I will touch on was the timeline for this. 30 by 30 is obviously a longer span of a project. So we wanted to touch base on what the key dates are and objectives to try to meet. So CPAT and CCED are released twice a year. Right now, we're working on what's called the 2023A release, which will be CPAT and CCD with all the edits we've made in the past 6 months. That information will be another avenue for you to download the full database for the state. All of those changes we've made would then become published and reflected to anyone who uses the data. That information will not be used by CNRA in an update because their next update is not planned until the end of 2023. So you don't have to make the May 31 deadline of giving us information in order to be shown in the next 30 by 30 update. That deadline is actually instead October 31st. So we're giving you sort of two options. Like if you feel like you can get part or all of this done right away, we're happy to take your information through May and then get that released, and you would see that reflected in June. And it's worth noting that apart from this effort, a lot of other agencies, organizations, and efforts use CPAT and CCED, so those edits would roll out to all of those folks using the data. But in order to get in the next 30 by 30 update, the deadline is October 31st. And some agencies have noted that they're going to aim for doing the land updates, so getting their properties properly reflected in geometry and attributes for the May 31, and then work on gap code assignment for in the second half of the year. That's perfectly fine. You can work with us multiple times or in staged efforts to get that done. And then, so our December release will come out for 2023B. That will incorporate all the edits through October that were submitted, and that will be used by CNRA, and that will rerun their refreshed 30 by 30 conserved layer that you see at the link provided here. So, I think that's the general gist of what I wanted to cover, and want to make sure I leave time for questions, as I know folks have tended to have a lot of questions related to this.
Yeah, there are a couple questions. So one question that Pam is asking in the Q&A is Green Info Network charging for this service? And my guess is it's the assistance with group, labeling gap codes or updating protected lands.
No, we work with you. We have a budget and work order with CNRA to do this work. So the time that we spend with you is not billed or anything. No. Yeah. So but we do fully recognize that it's still time and effort on your end. So that's part of the reason we're trying to be as flexible as possible. So I don't want you recreating or doing new work if you already have maps. We might be able to work with those. So yeah, you're not charged for our services, and hopefully we can smooth out how much work you have to do to make it easier.
Great. A very interesting question from Barbara on local tribes. So there's apparently a local tribe in her geography that's interested in land acquisition through 30 by 30 funding. And the question is, what kind of durable protection does it need to have in place to qualify as conserved, or are there options? Yes, so this is a definitely critical key question. And oftentimes we're generally referring folks back to CNRA, where we work with tribal experts and liaisons on that. In terms of CPAT and CCED, we only include those properties that are tribal if requested by the tribes themselves, as they're not technically public lands and or accessible or appropriate unless the tribe wants them included. But they are critical to California's success and talked about in 30 by 30 as being an element, but they don't really necessarily get well reflected through gap codes. So essentially, there are probably better avenues that we should work through, and that will most likely be with CNRA staff to understand how to get those accounted for properly. Okay. Yeah, so we're not trying to shoehorn those into the gap code system or CPAT and CCED. We want to acknowledge that they're definitely different and critical. Okay, great information. Another question in from Aubrey is, are properties mostly agency owned or privately owned? In CPAD, we have a mix of, if they're protected for open space, conservation, recreation purposes. So we'll have a mix of nonprofit, private lands, yeah, any number of things, especially within easements. The significant number of those are going to be held in private, or yeah, private property with public easements on them. Okay, so a mix. Great. So I'm going to turn to the broader audience Q&A then in terms of questions that either we didn't get to or have come in since the presentations have ended. I'm going to start with a question on advanced mitigation. How long do the mitigation credits last? And is it possible that they expire at the end of certain governmental administrations? So Liz, this one's for you.
I thought you were going to answer that one. Mitigation credits don't expire. They are released by the regulatory agencies once, let's say, mitigation banks or conservation banks achieve certain performance measures. And then if it's a mitigation or conservation bank, they can then sell those once they have acquired that. Mitigation credit agreements, the guidelines are being finalized now, but those credits don't last either. Don't expire either. It's really important because it costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time to invest in conservation, to invest in restoration and protection. And so if there is a deadline for, 5 years out, the credits expire, that doesn't give a lot of incentive for those investments. And for mitigation conservation banks in particular, and habitat conservation plans and CCPs, there's a lot of work that goes into creating those credits and creating those plans, and a lot of effort on the regulatory agencies to make sure that they agree with it. So it's pretty solid.
Great, thank you. A question for John, specifically for Huntington Beach. How far inland does saltwater intrusion reach the aquifer?
So that really depends on the area of our beaches, because it's not a straight line. It sort of undulates along our city, the southern region. But basically, it's roughly about 4 miles. So back in the 30s, Orange County Water District was formed here in Orange County, not just in Huntington Beach, with the idea of developing 23 deep wells. There are various depths where they injected fresh water into it. That's where we get most of our fresh water. That's sort of the blockage that stops salt water from intruding further into the Huntington Beach aquifilter. So this water is there and it's stored there. It's stored not only from rain, but anything that's still coming down from the SAR. But currently we're lucky because those aquifilters that we have in these particular wells actually produces 75% of the water that's needed in Huntington Beach. So we only import 25%. So those were developed back in the 30s just to be able to stop the saltwater from intruding further into the Huntington Beach area.
Great, thank you. And back over to Amanda. We're hopping all around right now. Barbara has a question on conservation easement lands and the process that you explained in your presentation. Does it apply or is it delineated in some way?
Yes, so easements should be reflected through the CCED or California Conservation Easement Database. It should be noted that we know we're missing a fair number of lands. It's much harder to unearth and uncover where and the terms of different easements. So the first thing is making sure that you're in that database, and we are happy to get you added there. And once in there, then yes, they are going through the same process of gap code assignment, and then that reflects if it goes into 30 by 30 or towards 30% or not.
Great, thank you. And one more question for Liz on advanced mitigation. How dynamic are the underlying data that created the ramp? So the example is we learned about species status, location, risk levels, or local adaptation needs. Does the ramp adapt?
It really should adapt, right? Because if there is a requirement for mitigation, it can't just be based on data that was acquired and created in static maps. You really have to go on the ground and make sure that that is what is happening on the ground is what is reflected in the data. And for that reason, ideally, there is a dynamic process by which that data is continually updated. Now, data sources are not often updated and they're all different. In some cases, there are updates to species databases that happen monthly. And then there are also databases that data sources that are static for a couple of years. So it really is a case by case. But what's really important is that what is reflected in a RAMP program is reflective of existing conditions and future conditions as well. And so there has to be a lot of intentionality on understanding what needs to be protected. A lot of the changes are about, conversion. There might be habitat that's been converted to development, or there's been active restoration that has literally changed the habitat from uplands to tidal wetlands, let's say. And so that really has to be important. But there has to be a lot of work that goes into these online tools that can allow for that dynamic updating, and that doesn't happen all the time.
Great, thank you. I'm going to point Amanda to the Q&A to see if you can answer by typing in an answer on that one while I wrap up, because I'm aware of the time. So at this point, I want to say thank you to Amanda, Liz, Dan, and John for the presentations today on the pathways to 30 by 30. Of particular note to me, I really appreciate the map component because I'm a geography major, so maps always inspire me. I would also like to offer additional thanks. There we go. Whoops, we already did questions. We can go ahead and move on to the next workshop series. So in case you're not aware, Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks is hosting a series of webinars. This is actually the first one. Each month on the 4th Thursday from 10 to 11:30, with the exception of November, that's the 5th Thursday, we will feature content related to 30 by 30 with the goal of helping you and your organization achieve your goals in alignment with the state's effort. Our May workshop includes 4 state conservancies that fund work across the Southland. If you're able to, take out your phone and scan the QR code with your camera and click on the link to register for this next event. We will also be sending the link out. And the link is being added or has been added to the chat already. So we have speakers from the State Coastal Conservancy. So if you're in a coastal county, you might want to attend to hear about their programs and funding, as well as 3 Southern California-based conservancies, the Santa Monica Mountains, the Rivers and Mountains, and the Coachella Valley Mountains. We hope to see you there. We are happy to add you to our list for notifications of future workshops. You can email us at community@fhbp.org and tell us that you want to be notified, and we will add you to our list. We do not automatically add you without your express permission. And keep your phones out, because we're also encouraging you to go to this link or scan this QR code to get added to the state's 30 by 30 email list. The California Natural Resource Agency provides content related to webinars, grants, programs, public comment periods, etc. So thank all of you, participants, attendees, those in the background. We appreciate you participating today. After the webinar ends, you'll get directed to a short survey. It's really easy. We're hoping you can provide a better understanding to us of what we can do better to improve today or future events, and maybe what we did well. So thank you, and I hope to see you all in May. Take care.